Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kay Jacobson. I'm a librarian with the Ramsey County Libraries, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the webinar on Ulysses S. Grant, brought to you by J.B. Andersen. Our teacher, J.B., was a long-term employee at the University of Minnesota. Um, he'd love to tell you about the many things that he's done. He's also was a high school teacher, and just his interest and love for history is what um, made this presidential series so popular. As I say, JB, you always make me think of, um, I don't know, like an grandfather or uncle that just sits on the porch and runs through history for you and kind of laid back. So today's program is brought to you through the co-sponsorship of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Minnesota, with financial support of the Ramsey County Library. So there you are, JB. We're going to turn things over to you, and I will talk to you at the end when we have questions.
Good. Thank you. Let me get set up here. Today, we're going to talk about the Grant presidency and Reconstruction, which is the African American experience following the Civil War. It was called, What Do We Do with All These Freed Slaves? Should they be allowed to vote? Can they even live here anymore? Do they need to be sent back home? What should we be doing? And that was called Reconstruction. In the 20th century, there have been rankings done since the 1940s by historians. And Grant has generally, through the 20th century, been ranked pretty mediocre, in the bottom third. That changed in the 21st century, due largely to a book that was written about him and the civil rights actions that he had taken. This is the book, Grant, by Ron Chernow. Here is Chernow pictured. Here's the cover of the book. You can buy it in paperback on Amazon for $14.18. It was published in 2017, and it moved Grant from being in the bottom third to up into the middle in the rankings of presidents. Grant on civil rights. We're going to have 4 slides here. And what did Grant wanted, or what was granted? Interesting. His last name, and it's granted. He wanted equal rights for African Americans. In other words, they could be elected to political office, they could vote, they could come and go any place that they wanted, etc. They could serve on juries. All of that Grant expected to be done. He was a giant supporter of Reconstruction. The Naturalization Act of 1870 granted citizenship to all foreign-born freed slaves. So there were some slaves that had been brought in from Africa. In essence, they were immigrants. They were not born here. So this granted citizenship to all blacks not born in the United States who had served as slaves in the United States. This act extended naturalization citizenship, as I've just stated, to African Americans, but it excluded the same rights to Asians. Lots of Asians were coming into the country during this period of time and staying on the West Coast, and many being involved in vegetable farming in California. And the biases against them remained in place, as of course they did for freed slaves also, even though the government was making these laws that established former slaves as citizens. Three of our four items concerning Grant on civil rights. Under Reconstruction, this was a major theme in Grant's presidency, and another element of it was military troops placed across the South. Make sure they don't secede again. Make sure that they treat freed slaves well, etc. Every city in the South, 20,000 population or larger, had military troops stationed in it. In most cases, every corner, every street corner had a military person standing on it, making sure that there were no problems, hopefully. Item 404, Grant told the southern states that you have to allow blacks to vote. That's in the 15th Amendment. Approve the 15th Amendment or else. And it got approved, but it really wasn't enforced until the 1960s. And here's a graphic of blacks lined up registering to vote or in a voting place waiting to vote. Oh. Next major item is Ku Klux Klan prosecutions under Grant. Grant wanted to be rid of the Ku Klux Klan. He had an attorney general pictured here, Amos Ackerman, who supported Grant's position. And there was an attorney general at this time. It had existed since the founding of the nation when Washington took office in 1789. But there was no Department of Justice yet. That was created under Grant and became effective on July 1st, 1870. So you now have a Department of Justice and an Attorney General with cabinet positions who can hopefully enforce what Grant wants for freed slaves, like get rid of the Ku Klux Klan. 3 enforcement acts, 7 items about these 3 enforcement acts for Reconstruction. It outlawed violence and intimidation of freed slaves. Hey, you can't come across this street. You stay on the other side of the street. Selective places where blacks could live, places they couldn't go. Here's a picture of black people lined up and voting. So this was applied especially to voting. No violence, no intimidation against freed slaves. Second major item of 7 that we'll look at is oops, I'm sorry. I thought I'd turned that off. There we go. Okay. Well, they'll hang up. Thanks. Okay. My turn again. So no discrimination by state officials, such as separate living places like we see here in this graphic, where people, this is, you can see the sign, this is the colored neighborhood, whites stay out, blacks please don't move out of that area, etc. But state officials could not establish these rules according to Grant and according to these 3 enforcement acts for Reconstruction. The president can use the army to enforce the acts. Now, this is very interesting, especially in light of present day activities. Can the president use the military for domestic issues? Can you move federal troops such as ICE agents, into Minnesota, or as is now being done, into Houston, Texas. So this is a big issue in 2026. There's been several laws passed that say, yes, it's okay. Some say, no, it isn't. The president can't use the U.S. military for domestic issues. 4 of 7. Federal marshals can begin charges against anyone who commits any of the following items that we have listed here. Election fraud. Okay, blacks get to vote. In order to make it a more of a white vote, we're going to put fake votes in. So election fraud items. Bribing voters. Come and vote. You have to vote for this person. If you do that, we'll give you a sandwich, or we'll give you a quarter, 25 cents, something like that. Bribing voters, intimidating voters, black voter, get out of here. You can't vote, etc. Stopping citizens from exercising constitutional rights. So federal marshals are looking for any of these kinds of violations. 4 of 7, this is continued. You might remember during the last presidential election in 2024, Elon Musk would get a auditorium full of Republican voters, and he said, thanks for doing this. We're going to draw the name of one of you, and you're going to get $1 million check for me. Thanks for voting Republican. And here are pictures of Musk handing out the $1 million checks to 2 different people. He did this many times during the campaign. Is this interfering with voting? Is this bribing people? Well, there's no consequences. Still a free man. Ku Klux Klan is banned, 5 of 7. We can't have organizations that harass blacks, and harass to the point of lynchings. From the end of the Civil War up to 1960, period of over 90 years, 4,000 blacks were lynched by anti-black groups, especially throughout the South. But in other states also, there were killings, shootings of blacks coming into some northern states. I once wrote a very lengthy article about near St. Cloud, Minnesota, and a black man was riding a horse through there and was captured and hung. So there were some northern incidences, but most of these hangings were in the South. So the Ku Klux Klan is banned. Their membership is arrested. In total, the Klan was eliminated. But a few years later, it's back, rising again. Lots of membership, etc. I've gone to little museums in little towns here in Minnesota, and also in South Dakota. And you go into those small town museums, and it's not unusual. They've got a Ku Klux Klan outfit sitting on a model in there. And I go, what's that about? And they said, well, we had a Ku Klux Klan group here. People gave us these uniforms after their father died. They didn't even know he'd been a member. So there were Klan operations throughout the United States, but basically it was a Southern states organization. 6 of 7. Federal government may bear witness to state and local elections. So here you've got a federal authority in military uniform, here one in civilian clothing, checking on voting, making sure the elections are constitutional, at the state and local levels. However, the Constitution says the elections are to be controlled by state and local officials. Is what these two men are doing, is it constitutional? Should it be left to state and local officials? May federal officials oversee state and local elections? Another major debate. Federal government may bear witness to state and local elections. A continuation here. This is what the Constitution says. Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators, so that spelling in the Constitution, CHUS, is the word or the way that choosing was spelled at the time the Constitution was written. So Congress can pass laws that control this. Anyway, penalties may include fines and imprisonment. So you may have to pay money or you may have to serve a prison term. Grant presidency, 3 enforcement acts. We're going to take a look at recent uses of these acts that were passed back in 1870. Mississippi Summer Project was an attempt to register Black voters. These 3 men working on the Mississippi Summer Project were murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan for registering Black voters. There were hundreds of college students in Mississippi at this time registering Black voters. In 2005, that's 41 years later, 18 men were charged with the murders of these 3 college students who were registering Black voters in Mississippi. They all received minor sentences, but the sentences were based on the 1871 Enforcement Acts, and the charges were manslaughter and less. They weren't first-degree murder, planned ahead, etc. Number 2, charges against Donald Trump have been based on these 1871 laws. Trump declared the 2020 election to be invalid, and he has been sued for that. Now, the case has been put on hold until he leaves the presidency, because you can't sue a president, you can't try a president for crimes, etc. That's debatable also based on a variety of laws that have been passed on that subject. Is the president above the law? Certainly has been here in recent years. Reactions to Reconstruction are our next segment. Southerners formed these anti-Reconstruction groups. In reality, they're anti-African American groups, but of course, Reconstruction was an attempt to make African Americans full-fledged citizens. The anti-groups there were groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the Redeemers, the Red Shirts, the White League, and violence became common. We've all heard of the Ku Klux Klan, but there's a lot of smaller groups, such as those listed here, who also were working against Reconstruction and keeping Blacks in their place. Here's a political cartoon from the period. This is Grant here, and here is a officer of Grant's. This guy's in a military outfit. Grant's holding a lamb, and it's labeled Louisiana White League. It was another name, White League, for the anti-Reconstruction groups. Grant is holding that lamb. Well, his buddy here can kill it with a sword. So he's killing off the Louisiana White League. This shows his opposition to it. Northerners started to back off of Reconstruction too. It was taken a while. Interest gets lost in the former slave situation. It's like a snap of the fingers and nobody cares anymore. Northerners, three reactions to Reconstruction. The economy started having a lot of difficulties, was in a downward spin. And that takes attention away from other issues, in this case, Reconstruction. Second reaction from Northerners. Grant was involved in some scandals. We're going to talk about that later. I have a section on it. We'll talk about it today, what those scandals were. But that became significant, written up in newspapers all across the country. And that drew a tremendous amount of attention away from Reconstruction and toward Grant and his misadventures. 1874 congressional elections. The Republican Party lost control of Congress. Republicans had pretty much been in control since 1860. Now, people are turning away from them. They're the party of Reconstruction. The Democrats are now in control of the United States Congress in 1874 election. Reconstruction's unnecessary. That became the theme. We don't need to do that. It'll take care of itself. Forget about it. This led to 100 years of white supremacy out of the 1870s. Turnaround came in the 1960s with the advance of the Lyndon Johnson administration after the assassination of Kennedy and Johnson winning the 1864 presidential election. Amazing thing about Johnson is he was from Texas, a southern state. And he taught before he became a politician. He taught 5th, 6th, and 7th graders, 1928 and 1929, in a Texas Mexican-American school. So he had an interest in this. Here he is with some of his class students standing in the back. There's a close-up of the picture of Lyndon Johnson when he was a school teacher. And you can see this is a predominantly Mexican-American or Spanish-American descent group. The Wallhausen Athletic Club, 1928. The South, 1875, what's going on? 10 of the 13 southern states are controlled by anti-Reconstruction Democrats. So these far south states, places like Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, were kind of held back a bit. But the deep south southern states were very much anti-Reconstruction. And they hated the Republican Party in the South. They're the ones that fought against secession and then saw to it that slavery was ended. So they were anti-Republican at the time and pro-Democrat. These parties have shifted values. That's happened. Democrats now are kind of the party of minorities as opposed to Republicans holding that position. Grant's new attorney general was the gentleman pictured here, Edwards Pierpont, who has neck whiskers. I've been pointing out these neck whiskers. Everything has a history, including fashion. So here are guys that shave their faces, but they don't shave their necks. Anyhow, Edwards Pierpont, the United States Attorney General, he told the Republican governor of Mississippi something needs to be done about the violence against blacks, especially in your state. Now we're going to take a look at Grant's scandals. Of course, nothing came of trying to control what southern states did with their black populations. So Grant scandals. First, we have the whiskey ring. This is whiskey distillers, and there was a tax on alcohol, on whiskey in particular. And the distillers wanted to end or eliminate this tax on whiskey. And Grant's staff, his cabinet, Grant himself, they favored that, get rid of that tax on whiskey. So second part of the whiskey ring here. Grant's Secretary of the Treasury, pictured here, was Benjamin Bristow. He led the investigation that and found many people guilty of this whiskey ring scandal, trying to make sure that the tax on whiskey is taken away. And then, of course, the people that make whiskey, they'll reduce the price maybe 1/10 or 1/3 of what it used to be. So they're still charging more for the whiskey, making a greater profit as a result. Grant's private secretary was acquitted of taking part in this scandal, found not guilty. Grant testified in his favor. So you got a president of the United States testifying in favor of one of his employees in a court case. 2 of 7. The Credit Mobilier Company. They were a transcontinental builder of railroads. So transcontinental means you go all the way across the present day United States. The distance from New York City to Los Angeles is about 3,000 miles. So this is a hefty amount of track that's needed. And this company, Credit Mobilier, bribed members of Congress. Don't investigate what we're saying about how many miles of track we laid. Oh, we laid 100 miles yesterday. Fact is, they laid 45, but they report 100 miles. And then they get paid for 100 miles by the federal government. Federal government paid the company to build tracks, and they reported track building that never occurred. Here are the prices that were paid. These are the actual prices. Excuse me, in the 1860s and 70s. $16,000 per mile for all track built on flat land. The railroad company building that would get $16,000 per mile from the federal government. That's $403,000 by inflation in 2026. Yikes. They get $32,000 a mile for foothills. if you got to build through an area where you got to, maybe haul away a whole bunch of dirt, get rid of some hills that are there, or you need to wind your way through the hills, you get $32,000 a mile for building track in a foothill area. That's $806,000 by inflation today. And if you build in mountains, which usually involves making a tunnel, you get $48,000 for every mile of track that's laid through mountains. That is $1.2 million in 2026. Gigantic amounts of money. It maybe costs just a portion of that. So this was feeding corporations lots of money. Railroads also received land grants then. Oh, your track runs here. Okay. This is literally true. We will give you all the land 10 miles on each side of the track that you have laid. So you're in control of that. Now, that land, of course, became exceptionally valuable because it was close to the railroad. You didn't have to haul your produce 30 miles to get it there. You only had to haul it 10 miles, 5 miles, 3 miles maybe. So that land, the railroads could sell for a large amount of money because it limited the amount of transportation time for people who were growing agricultural items or manufacturing something, so on. In total, during this period of building railroads, 131 million acres of public land were given to railroads. The average cost in 1870 of an acre of land was $7.50. Some were as low as $5, some as high as 10. I'm calling the average 750. By inflation in 2026, that's $189 per acre. 131 million acres that they got, $24.8 billion in value. All railroads in 2024, this is a 2024 act. Railroads are still getting benefits. In 2024, railroads received $48.5 billion from the federal government. That is $147 per person. That's assuming 330 million people in the United States, with half of them being children. So $147 per person. Family of four, $600. So these scandals are not a government problem, according to many people. Government gets blamed, but is the government at fault? Well, lots of people say no. This is a corporation problem. It's a business problem. Now, if the government had watched over this closer, if they'd regulated it, there were many who would have said, stop regulating businesses, especially this has been a major item for the Republican Party. Now we've got Minnesota in 2025, meals for children. Government is blamed for the fraud here. Oh, we served 1,000 meals last week and they only served 350 and nobody was watching over them. Of course, if somebody had been watching over them, they'd have been blamed of heavy regulation. So government is blamed. Who's at fault? Corporations are. That's another side of the argument, anyway. A third major scandal of Grant's during his presidency are called the Indian Ring, and it involves the Department of the Interior. The Department of Interior was granted, they would get all kinds of objects together, clothing, blankets, food, and they would distribute those to Native American reservations that were beginning to be built up around the country. And that was according to a treaty that we'd made with Native American groups. Well, what happens is they're granted the right to have trading posts on reservations. And this is individuals who are not associated with the Department of Interior. The officials accept bribes. Now, yeah, okay, you can go into native areas and you can build this trading post. People then can come in there, Native Americans, and shop for goods. And these are goods that by treaty they were supposed to be given. Black Friday, financial panic. Jay Gould pictured here on the left and Jim Fisk pictured here on the right. They were big time businessmen during the 1870s, and they wanted to corner the gold market. They said, if we could buy up a whole bunch of gold and get it off the market, gold would be scarce out there because we're hoarding it. And that would cause the price to rise. Then we'll sell our gold when the price has risen. Now, Grant agreed to delay the sale of government gold, thereby causing a shortage also. Gould could sell their gold at a higher price. Now, Black Friday occurred. This is a single day. Grant reversed his decision. He said, where the federal government isn't going to hoard gold anymore, to the advantage of a couple of major private businessmen. And he releases gold onto the market. And this is called Black Friday. So all this government gold, all of a sudden, okay, it's all for sale. Prices plunge dramatically, such as in this graphic. Here is the hoarding of gold begins by Fisk. And then suddenly, bang, a lot of gold comes on the market and the price drops dramatically back to where it had been. Next, Sanborn incident. Sanborn is the person in the top right of the photo here, the guy with the deep set eyes. He was the Secretary of Treasury. I'm sorry, Sanborn is the guy on the bottom. Secretary of Treasury is William Adams Richardson, this fellow here. This is Sanborn. He is allowed by the Secretary of the Treasury to collect $427,000 in unpaid taxes from businesses. There was not a personal income tax at this time. That's about $11.3 million in 2025 by inflation. Okay, Sanborn's he's gonna collect these unpaid taxes. Sanborn kept much of the money. He said, well, that's a commission for me. So he's collecting $11.3 million in today's money and pays back a couple million to the U.S. government. So he's becomes a multi-millionaire by being the guy that gets to collect unpaid taxes. And he had been a Union general. Here's a picture of him here as a Union general. The Belknap bribery. This is Grant's Secretary of War, William Belknap. This is him in both of these photos. He accepted bribes for licenses to trade with Indians. You want to trade with Indians? Okay, give me $10,000. And he was also a Union general during the Civil War. Belknap bribery. He was impeached as a result of accepting these briberies and allowing certain people to trade with Indians. But was a violation of treaties. He's found guilty and he resigned his position as Secretary of War. So you can see these bribery, lots of bribery, making money problems, lots of scandals here. These things getting reported like crazy. We're going to take a look at the final one now. It's known as the Salary Grab Act. Congress voted huge pay raises to themselves and others in the federal government, hence the Salary Grab Act. The United States House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, the President, Supreme Court justices, and other court officials, and civil servants all received pay raises. And here's a chart showing first, here's the group. The House and Senate, they were being paid $5,000 a year, and they advanced their income through this legislation to $7,500 a year. That pay raise alone, that increase in 2026 is about a $63,000 pay raise. The president went from $25,000 to $50,000. That's a $25,000 pay raise. That's about $630,000, $630,200 in 2026. $10,000 increase in pay to the Supreme Court and the cabinet members. That's about $250,000 in 2026. Civil servants, tons of them, very lots of different jobs, very varied, but they received pay raises also. Let's take a look at the House and Senate. They are making $5,000 here in 1870. Today, they are paid $174,000. By inflation, this $5,000 would be $212,000. So they're underpaid today. Their salary has not gone up as high as inflation has gone up. And the president making $50,000. Today he makes $400,000. By inflation, he should be making $1.1 million. And he's making $50,000. At least that was the proposal. The fact is, public went berserk over this. Salary raises were repealed, so they never happened. The Grant presidency, Civil Rights Act, 1875. This allowed African Americans access to public facilities. Civil Rights Act. You can call on your government and they need to do things for you that are publicly available. 1883, it's 8 years after the passage of this law. This bunch of Supreme Court justices, pictured here, declared the act unconstitutional. No access for blacks to public facilities. Make that unconstitutional. Toilets, water fountains, parks, etc. Blacks can't use them. The economy. Let's take a look at that under the Grant presidency. Almost every war, such as the Civil War, ends up having financial difficulties, or wars create financial difficulties once they come to an end. And this was true for the Civil War. Here's the Civil War depression. Look here, the economy's growing like this, and then bang, Civil War ends, and you get a drop in the economy. And this is a drop of about two of these graph bars that you see here, these lines, after the Civil War. Here's the Great Depression of the 1930s. 1920s were okay. We had a 10-year period that went reasonably well, but by the 1930s, the whole thing collapses, and often blamed on World War I. So here you have the Great Depression. Huge drop, 3.6 graph bars. Then you can see it slowly grows back up, declines a bit. And then here's World War II. World War II ends here, and there is a 2.5 graph bar decline in the economy. So interesting. Wars, I mean, everybody gets to work. Unemployment rates are incredibly low during wars. Then the war ends, and bang, things get difficult. Lots of paper money was issued during the Civil War, but it wasn't backed up by gold or silver. We need money. We need to pay people stuff. There are soldiers that need to be paid. There are industries that are making weapons. They need to be paid. There isn't enough money in circulation to pay them all. So you print extra money, and you don't back it up with gold or silver. This creates inflation. Value of money decreases. Public Credit Act of 1869. Bonds are issued during the Civil War. Help us pay for the Civil War. Here's a $10 bond. You pay $8 for it. In 5 years, we'll give you $10 back. Or here's a $100 bond. You pay $80 for it. In 10 years, we'll give you $100 back. A lot of these bonds are issued during the Civil War. Now, what this Public Credit Act says is they have to be repaid in coin. Now, coin has value. It's got gold in it and silver in it. So they're saying you can't repay these Civil War debts here now coming up in paper. You have to pay it in coin made from gold or silver. So it has value. Then we return to the gold standard only. Silver will no longer be used to back up gold. Now, having gold and Fort Knox, famous to all of us, a place where the United States government stored its gold, and that backed up the paper currency that we have. That all ended under Richard Nixon. He got rid of all precious metal standards. We're going to back up the government paper money with nothing of value. Money will now be backed up and called a Federal Reserve note. It'll be backed up by the federal government, guaranteed to you by the federal government. Here is a $1 bill before 1971. And notice it says silver certificate across the top here. It's backed up with silver that's stored at Fort Knox. After 1971, this is what a dollar bill looks like. And up here, no longer says silver certificate. It says Federal Reserve note down here. Sorry about the fuzziness. So anyway, today, our money is backed up by the federal government itself, not by any precious metals. The gold buy-up conspiracy. We mentioned this earlier. These guys are railroad tycoons and worse at this time. In the 1870s, you could be real bad people. And this is Gould and Fisk. They agree to buy up as much gold as possible between the two of them. Let's start buying up gold. Get it off the market. We're going to hoard it. That'll raise the price of gold. Then once the price has gone up because there's less of it out in the market, we're keeping it stored in our own storeroom. Then we'll be able to sell it for more than we bought it for. So this is a couple of guys that are going to buy up and hoard gold in order to raise the price of the gold. Gould, hey, take the U out of his name, and it's gold. Maybe he does deserve all of it with a name like that. But gold was controlled by the federal government. So Fisk and Gould had to buy it from the federal government. Now, every 2 weeks at this time, the federal government will have an auction on gold that they don't need. They have too much backing up the paper money. And these sales, I mean, it's just not enough gold to accomplish what Fisk and Gould want to accomplish, buying up a whole bunch of gold and hoarding it. So what are they going to do? Well, they approach a federal employee. Hey, sell gold more frequently, more of it. Federal employee told them no. So they go to another federal employee. Sell gold more frequently. He said yes. So Fisk and Gould then go higher. This is Abel Corwin, pictured here. He was offered a bribe. He accepted it. Now he's a brother-in-law to Ulysses Grant. Fisk and Gould now have access to Grant through his brother-in-law, Abel Corwin. And this is all due to briberies. So they then say, let's go to the Treasury Department. And they find an assistant Treasury Secretary who is interested in talking to them. They now have access to the Treasury Department. Now Grant tries to fry them. Hey, get rid of these guys, this Gould and Fisk deal. And he called for a smaller sale of gold, not a larger sale, limited again. Fisk meets with Grant, and he says, gee whiz, this isn't what we had in mind. Grant responded negatively. And he said, no, I'm not going to do anything about it. And Grant then puts a major amount of federal gold up for sale. And this is known as Black Friday. It was the 24th of September, 1869. Gold market was flooded. Grant took much of the gold out of the Federal Reserves, put it on the market. There was a 17% drop in the gold price. Now, Fisk and Gould had been able to hoard a lot of gold. This is a big hurt for them. They're not going to make any money. They're actually going to lose money. Economic panic. Now, that's what an economic depression was called in the 1800s, was a panic. And lasted several months. Early 1870s, it returns to normal. This is another big negative for Grant. Had a downturn in the economy, major league. Some damage was done to Fisk and Gould. They still had lots of gold they could sell, but they didn't make the money on it that they had hoped for. World relations is the next item we're going to talk about from the Grant presidency. Grant knew nearly nothing about foreign policy. He was pretty dependent on people he appointed, relied almost totally on his Secretary of State, pictured here, Hamilton Fish. This is Fish. This is Fish's relative. And Fisk, Fish here, hey, he's got neck whiskers also. Big deal at that time. Santo Domingo annexation. This is continuing with the foreign affairs policies, and it involves an island in the Caribbean Sea. This is Charles Sumner. He is not a Grant appointee. He's not a Grant cabinet member, but he is the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So he's the world affairs guy in the U.S. Senate. And he doesn't like Grant, actually hates him. It's very uncooperative with Grant. Sumner fights against Grant because Grant wants to annex Santo Domingo. Today it's called the Dominican Republic. And here it is. It is the east 2/3 of this island that includes Haiti in the west. Haiti, by the way, is the poorest economic nation in the Americas. Here's Cuba. Here's the Dominican Republic. Here's Puerto Rico over here. Here's a different map of it. Shows Florida, Cuba. Here's Mexico. Here's South America. Here's the Dominican Republic. Grant wants to annex it, take it over. It's run by natives who settled there, the people that came in from other countries, but the people native to Santo Domingo or the Dominican Republic control it. It's not controlled by Spain or France or England, or it's a self-regulating nation. Here's a world map. This shows where the Caribbean Sea is, just south of the United States. Sumner, 1867, very supportive of the purchase of Alaska. But now he doesn't want anything done in the Caribbean. He doesn't want Grant to be allowed to annex the Dominican Republic. A treaty is arrived at, but it has to be approved by the Senate. And the Senate doesn't approve it. So there's no treaty made with Santo Domingo, no annexing of it. Sumner had three major objections to Santo Domingo coming under the control of the United States. The first one was a race issue. Lots of freed slaves. They were getting out of areas in the Americas, including the United States, and traveling to Caribbean islands, migrating into that Caribbean island place. So you got a lot of freed slaves down there. Why do we want to take over islands or a big island like Santo Domingo when it's a bunch of slaves, former slaves that are moving there? So he was opposed to freed slaves leaving the United States. They were also cheap labor here in the U.S. Now they're migrating into places that are controlled by the U.S., and cheap labor is disappearing. Lots of political instability in the Caribbean Sea, too. What are these islands doing? Who's controlling them? It's up and down. It's sideways. It's Sumner objected to don't even get involved in that mess that's going on in the Caribbean Sea. Third, European governments were taking over other countries, and we don't want that to happen. Now, we don't want other countries to come in here, but we're saying we will. It's imperialism. If we don't like it, we shouldn't be doing it. This is Sumner talking. So Grant attempted to replace Sumner, which he had no power to do, as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He starts talking to other people in the Senate. It goes nowhere, it fails. Sumner remains the head of the Senate Foreign Relations community. 8 major concerns from Grant about Santo Domingo. European countries are going to take it over. We don't want that. We want it. We don't want European countries taking over and controlling sea to the south of us. Secondly, Santo Domingo was a good escape place for freed slaves. Lots of slaves are going there. That could stop. This was another concern of Grant's. Third concern of Grant's, the area around Santo Domingo gave control over European nations in particular, but any nation or group of nations from entering into the Caribbean Sea and into the Gulf of Mexico and having access to Central America. Here's a map. If we could control this area here and set up military vessels, we could control other countries coming into this area. We can say, all you can do is trade. You're going to report to us when you leave, and we want to see that you got tons of sugar on board your ship. And there can't be any soldiers coming in here on board, or no Marines, etc. So we can control what comes and goes in the Caribbean Sea if we take over Santo Domingo, which is what Grant wanted to do. Santo Domingo, they have lots of natural resources, sugarcane like crazy, fish, limestone for building, petroleum. We were entering oil and gas phase. And, whoops. Interesting thing about sugarcane is slaves were used to harvest sugarcane. It was a horrible job. The average life expectancy of a slave once they started growing and harvesting sugarcane was 7 years. I mean, this was just very difficult work. So, today, still lots of sugarcane coming out of the area, lots and lots of petroleum. We have rigs that are built out into the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. 5 of 8 naval bases could be built there. The Monroe Doctrine, named for President James Monroe. All nations stay out of the Americas. You have no right to be here. We will control ourselves only. So if you're an African, an Asian nation, European, anybody that isn't in the Americas, you stay out of here. Well, that didn't happen, of course. Spain moved in all over South and Central America, with the exception of Brazil, which was taken over by Portugal. And it took the Pope to resolve that issue. So all nations stay out of the Americas. Grant says, we have the Monroe Doctrine, and we're going to enforce it. Item 6 of 8, British, very difficult in the Caribbean, harassing U.S. shipping. And that doesn't mean government ships, but private U.S. companies and their ships. Owning an island in the area would be great for the United States because we could control that better then. 7 of 8. United States presence in the area increases the possibility of building a canal across Central America somewhere. And that, of course, would be fantastic for trade if ships could pass through on water in Central America rather than having to go all the way around South America, which takes several months longer. And you wouldn't have to, in Central America, unload your ship onto land, get all of that material moved across Central America over to the Pacific Ocean, all of it put on a ship over there. You could avoid that. Everything stays on one ship, you take a canal. Well, it'd be 45 years after this concern before there would be a canal across Central America. That occurred in 1914. It was started by Theodore Roosevelt, but finished under the Woodrow Wilson administration. Now, where did people want to build the canal? It wasn't down in Panama, where it's the narrowest space. They wanted to build across Nicaragua. And Nicaragua, look at this big lake. And there's lots of rivers here. You build a couple of short canals between 3 rivers, and you travel the rivers, and then you get to cross this huge lake and another little canal, and you're out into the Pacific Ocean. This was the place being picked in the 1870s. But by the time the canal got built, like 1908 to 1914, it was down in here. Grant concerns about Santo Domingo. Finally, last one, 8 of 8. A United States presence in the area would make possible the ending of slavery. The United States has ended it, but they still have it in Cuba. They still have it in Brazil. Let's get rid of it in the Americas. And this is a photograph of Brazilian slaves. Grant used the diplomatic corps members to aid in the annexation, Department of State. And they were to help draw up a treaty, get support from Congress, etc., but it failed. Treaties. Well, we can't take it over. We can't occupy it. Let's see what we can do. We negotiated a treaty that involved a $1.5 million payment to the Dominican Republic, $37.8 million in 2025. Now, we also made and that was just thanks for letting us do this next item, $2 million payment to you give us a port city rental. We're just renting it. We're not taking it over, but we can have ships there and we can have a port. We can get supplies from you folks, but we can guard that whole Caribbean Sea area. That was $50.4 million in 2025. These figures now, during the first 4 months of 2026, have actually gone down a bit. So, by the comparison, Grant made a second attempt for a treaty with Santo Domingo, an attempt to take it over. And the Senate again said no, they did not approve the treaty. The Senate wasn't interested in us moving into Santo Domingo, taking it over. Grant on foreign relations. Grant was an expansionist. I mean, what president hasn't been almost? More territory for the United States. Greater international influence for the United States. And the more that the U.S. can expand coast to coast, make it a coast to coast, Atlantic to Pacific nation, uh, and let's move southward too. And of course, I mean, for decades, we controlled the dictator of Cuba that had all sorts of goods for us. So, why was all of this done? Mostly it's been done to protect U.S. corporations, sugar companies, fruit companies, tobacco companies, coffee companies. These are all products that came out of Central America in particular and South America also. Tobacco, fruit, sugar, and coffee. So it's a tremendous amount of agricultural products there. And the United States wants to protect that for United Fruit Company and other outfits. So no countries outside the Americas can have influence or invasion in the Americas. This again is the Monroe Doctrine. Grant is a gigantic supporter of that. And here's Grant. He really likes Bolivia. He wants good relationships with Bolivia. He wants to start having good relations with countries in the Americas. But this is the one that gets resolved, and Grant's able to establish nice relationships with this. It's a landlocked country in South America. It has no access to the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans. Same with Paraguay. All these other nations have access to waterways. Jewish persecutions in Romania. Grant gets involved in that. This, again, we're talking about foreign relations here. He appointed a Jewish lawyer to the U.S. consulate in Romania. Here's Romania. You see it has access to the Black Sea here, and it's surrounded by Russia to the north. And so that's a big deal. Treaty of Washington, 1871. Confederate ship Alabama, pictured here. Here's a photograph of sailors aboard the Alabama. It was a Confederate ship during the U.S. Civil War, and it destroyed a lot of Union ships. And guess where it was made? It was made by the British, and then it was given to the Confederacy. You know, anytime you have a war, especially a civil war, there are great concerns about, will other countries get involved in this? What if Britain backs the Confederacy? Well, Britain decided they weren't going to do anything. They didn't want to get involved in that war, but they were able to sneak things in to aid the Confederacy. One of them was this ship, the Alabama. Britain has to make payments to the United States now. The war is over. That ship that you built and gave to the Confederacy did a lot of damage to ships of the United States during the Civil War. So pay up. That's the first element. Second element, United States will make payments to Britain because our citizens have indeed been fishing in Canadian waters, and that's illegal. Third element, United States will make payment for loss of British lives during the United States Civil War. Lots of ships coming and going. There were people, British officials living in the United States that were killed. So make compensation for the loss of British citizens during the Civil War. The British settled on paying the U.S. as a result of this treaty $15.5 million. In 2026, that's about $391 million. Korea relations. How are we doing for questions?
We've got about five so far.
Oh, should I quit here? No?
We could.
Yeah, okay. Let me quit there.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Um,
Okay.
I want to turn on my captions. I'm ready.
So going back to the Reconstruction era, someone is wondering, are there any like journals or letters from U.S. troops who served in the South during Reconstruction? And how did those troops feel about about what they were ordered to do there? Wondering if you have any knowledge of that, I guess, in this question.
Well, the Southern diaries are pretty negative about what happened. And yes, people kept diaries, and that was kind of the thing to do. There's lots of them in local museums or local historical uh, houses that describe individual matters during the Civil War, but it's opinions are varied and tremendously, but mostly they're the Southern, the Confederate diaries are, they think it's pretty unfortunate what's happening with their states down there, and they're, tremendous lack of economic growth in the South, very poor areas, and for decades afterwards. And there's reflections on that sort of thing. There are officers in the Confederacy that kept diaries. Some of them are in foreign countries because they left the U.S. worried they'd be arrested. And those diaries that were then kept and moved to England and continued are very uh, much concerned about the United States and the loss of the Confederacy and the end of slavery, those sorts of things.
So,
Yeah.
okay, I sent out a link from the National Park Service on their thing on their website. They have a connection to the Reconstruction era and links to national parks, battlefield sites, things like that that connect to that and other things. There's a Reconstruction era network thing too. So I thought if anyone's interested, that's over in chat. You can find that link there.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Let's go on. Our next one. Was there anything more Grant could have done to allow blacks to be able to vote?
Um, well, he, he could have been a lot more difficult with troops stationed in the South. He had them there and could have done more prosecutions of Southerners. But there was a lot of opinion that was opposed to the South being treated poorly. Bring it back in, let them be states again, put their people that were in charge back in charge, let the people that had been in their legislatures continue to be in their legislatures. Let Southerners who had served in the U.S. Congress come back in to the U.S. All of that was done. Could have not done any of that. Could have treated them as conquered territory with no rights. You're not going to have elections. We're going to be in charge. Uh, I'm going to appoint military people to be the governor of each state and so on, like we did with Germany at the end of the war and with Italy, World War II. And so, yeah, things could have been a whole lot more tougher.
Hmm.
Now, Grant believed in Reconstruction, which to him meant rights for people that were slaves, but it didn't mean controlling the South heavily. And had he done that, it might have been a different situation, especially for freed slaves. Basically, once Grant left office, presidents just left the South alone, and rights for blacks just didn't occur until 50, 60 years ago. It started with some enforcement. Um,
So, regarding those laws that were passed during Reconstruction that allowed U.S. military to monitor balloting places, did those laws have sunset provisions, or could the department could oh DJT? I was like going, oh, it's Trump. Sorry, I was going to say Department of Justice, but I was like, no, no, no. Could Trump use those laws today?
um, well, he would say so, yes. Uh,
But were there sunset provisions, or was it just
no, those laws were passed, and there's I don't recall that any of those laws about the South that placed soldiers there said this will end in 1878.
okay.
Uh, it'll end when you're back being nice again, you know, when there's no threats of further secession. Even though these states were allowed back in, their representatives were allowed to continue to run things again. There were still concerns that there'd be rebellions, and there were laws. You will be tried by laws that we have passed in the federal government if you rebel again. So there was very little difficult treatment for Southerners, virtually all of them. But if you rebel again, then there were sentences set, 5 years in prison. You rebel a third time after you get out of prison, 10-year term sentences. So,
So, okay, so this person says it seemed that Grant was more rigorous in protecting public funds during the war. Why was he so lax during his presidency? So, and they say, I remember reading that he didn't benefit personally from the fraud during the presidency. Is that correct?
yes, yeah. He, it was people under him. It was people in his administration that were causing lots of financial problems. And they'd made some money on the war. The rise of corporations in the United States is from the end of the Civil War to 1900, the latter third of the 19th century saw the rise of corporations. The wealthiest person by inflation is still one of these gigantic corporate owners from the late 1800s, uh, by inflation anyway. And so it's people really didn't know what to do. What are we going to do? What are these corporations about? And more than anything, they were giving support to them. Politicians were, and at the federal level, such as the comments about railroad building that I talked about in today's lecture. Railroads were not the only companies that were receiving benefits from the government. And so United States history from the end of the Civil War to the present day has had a lot to do with corporations. There are political scientists who call us a corporatocracy, not a democracy, and that corporations really have, the amount of access they have, the amount of money that a presidential election costs. We're spending $1 billion on a presidential election by the amount of money that's contributed to those political parties is astronomical. And they do TV ads and so on. So anyway,
Okay.
end of story.
Have we ever had a corruption-free administration?
Uh, Jimmy Carter comes to mind, but no. Uh, and there have been difficulties, and it depends on what you mean by corruption. If it's corruption in the government and corruption with corporations, I think that's one thing that's of the greatest significance. If it's corruption because you're married and you had a sexual affair, that's another kind of
Mhm.
that's morality. Should that count? Does that affect you and what you can do as president? Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Got three left, but we don't have that much time. So, something for you to think of for next week. How do you rank the Grant presidency? That would be you. Who paid for the rebuilding of the South? And also pointing out that we don't think they don't think you answered the one question about troops. It was how did the troops from the North feel about what they were ordered to do in the South during
Oh,
Reconstruction?
yeah.
So,
It varied greatly.
okay, so those are things for you to think of and
Okay.
maybe answer next week because we are now at 1:59. And I don't know if you can, Grayson, if you can get those questions to JB or if they just disappear. You would know on that versus me. I'll try and remember them also.
Email them
Oh,
to
he
us.
can do. So he's going to send you those questions. Okay.
Okay, good.
So we will,
Thanks.
and why was Grant lax during his presidency on, um, the guarding the money or like when did he find out about the scandals? About in terms of public funds. Okay, it is now 2 o'clock. Lots of questions, lots of good answers. So everyone, it's like, is next week the last week?
No, we have 2 weeks left.
2 weeks left. I wasn't sure. I've been gone, um, the last couple weeks here, but so 2 more weeks, and like we said, we will have links probably up before the end of the week on YouTube and the library website. Otherwise, everyone, have a wonderful day. Enjoy the sunshine, and we will see you again next Wednesday at 12:30.